The chasm that lay between us, how high the mountain I could not climb. In desperation, I turned to heaven and spoke your name into the night. Then through the darkness, your loving kindness tore through the shadows of my soul. The work is finished, the end is written. Jesus Christ, my living hope. Who could imagine so great a mercy? What heart could fathom such boundless grace? The God of ages stepped down from glory to wear my sin and bear my shame. The cross has spoken, I am forgiven. The King of Kings calls me his own. Beautiful Savior, I'm yours forever. Jesus Christ, my living hope. Hallelujah, praise the one who sets me free. Hallelujah, death has lost its grip on me. You have broken every chain. There's salvation in your name, Jesus Christ, my living hope. Hallelujah, praise the one who sets me free. Hallelujah, death has lost its grip on me. You have broken every chain. There's salvation in your name, Jesus Christ, my living hope. Then came the morning that sealed the promise. Your buried body began to breathe. Out of the silence, the roaring lion declared the grave has no claim on me. Then came the morning that sealed the promise. Your buried body began to breathe. Out of the silence, the roaring lion declared the grave has no claim on me. Jesus, yours is the victory.
So I've been having a little bit of a hard time sort of forming words for so much of what's been going on in the world. And I know that I'm not the only one for sure that's sort of feeling the tension of what is happening and how we're going to respond to all of these different things that are going on. And, on one side of things, you have the urge to sort of fight for the lives of those who are being lost, and being lost because of systemic racism, being lost because there is this thing that exists, this evil that exists in the world that we have to speak to, of course. And then on the other side of that is the idea of like damaging a community to sort of make a point, and the violent protest that we've talked about before. And it's been very difficult, for some especially to sort of reconcile between the two, or to sort of separate the two of protest and anarchy, or protest and terrorism. And it's been very interesting kind of going through the different conversations about what all of this is going on. And of course, a lot of people are having a hard time trying to even understand and to even have the conversation, because there's so much tension being built up that when you do have the conversation with anybody else, and especially with somebody that you may disagree with or even agree with, but sometimes there's trigger words that come up, and so you don't know how to respond to those kinds of things. And it's very interesting how all of this is going on, and it's frustrating. It really is. It's heartbreaking. It is terrifying. It is tense on so many levels, and we still don't know how to have these places of tension. On the conversation of systemic racism, things like this have gone on for so long that at some point, the person who has experienced racism and the person who has experienced possible fatal encounters with officers, but not just officers, but people in general, like people who truly hate other people for their color, for just being different, right? And when you encounter these kinds of things, it's hard not to speak for them, and it's hard not to protest. And the funny thing is, protest is actually embedded in the Christian DNA. Protest is embedded in the idea of church. Protest is embedded in the Bible. The prophets are protesters. The poets are protesters. And in times like these, we have a very difficult time forming words. Even now, a week after some of the horrific events that we've seen in Long Beach, forming words is a very difficult thing to do for me. Forming a sermon has been extremely difficult, and I've been having such a hard time with this, and I'm still going to have a hard time with this, and so I'm hoping very much that this sermon becomes something that God takes over, because of the fact that I want it to make sense, for one, but I also want to make sure that I'm also speaking God's truth into this moment. And so I'm going to ask that you pray with me in your homes at this very moment, and if we can get together and bring God into our spaces, into this digital space, but also into our very homes as well. So would you pray with me on this? God, thank you so much for your protection, your guidance, your love. Thank you for being the God that you are, that when there is injustice, you speak up. When there's injustice, you call us into this moment, into the moment to speak to the moment and to deliver, to look into what we have in our hands and go with it. We thank you, Lord. Challenge us and call us. And whatever you have in your word, challenge us and call us. In your name we pray. Amen. Langston Hughes has a poem called Harlem, and it says this: what happens to a dream deferred? Does it dry up like a raisin in the sun, or fester like a sore and then run? Does it stink like rotten meat, or crust and sugar over like a syrupy sweet? Maybe it just sags like a heavy load, or does it explode? Almost 60 years ago, maybe 50 years ago now, Martin Luther King Jr., of course, we all know the I Have a Dream speech. We all know the biography, we all know the assassination, we know the quotes that are showing up on Facebook, right? And we see a lot that is going on about how different people within those times were dealing with the different issues that we have on systemic racism and police brutality that were fostered by systemic racism. And the I Have a Dream speech was a very powerful speech that we can still quote today in some respect, but there's so much to that speech that we don't actually hear. Knowing that freedom rings and freedom rings, right? Let freedom ring. And knowing that there was a dream that changed the world. However, one of the things about Martin Luther King Jr.'s I Have a Dream speech was that it was truly a projection of a future yet to come that speaks to the reality that doesn't necessarily exist yet. Decades later, we're still fighting for that reality. Decades later, we're still fighting for that dream. And Langston Hughes' poem sort of sheds light on the idea of what happens when a dream is deferred for so long. It's like our student loans, right? When you have a student loan and you and you keep deferring it over and over, and there's built up interest, or there's a set interest in there, right? And when the student loan kind of builds up and you keep deferring it, but the interest is still building, sooner or later your debt is going to be exponential. I feel like that's actually what happens with injustice as well. Over time, the interest keeps building up. And at some point, something's going to explode. This is not an excuse for the violent crimes that we've seen in our city. This isn't an excuse even for the violent crimes that we see in other cities as well. The nation is on fire. It was on fire this past weekend for sure. And we're seeing the aftermath at the moment. But the Black community has never necessarily had an aftermath, because racism is a constant battle. And at some point, the words cannot form, especially following a devastating crisis. The words just cannot be formed. And the Bible is really clear on that very fact as well. The Bible resonates and is empathetic about that very fact, that words following a crisis cannot be formed. When a community is devastated, when a nation is devastated, when a people unified is devastated by the evil that exists in this world beyond the control of the human being, beyond the control of a system even. When that devastation occurs, the words cannot be formed. And the Bible empathizes. So Lamentations is one of the most pivotal places where words are not necessarily formed well. Where there's nothing else that you can do but just cry and cry out. Where the deepest, darkest parts of humanity show up in the words that are being said. And it truly is a deep and dark place. And I'm hoping this month that we get to read through Lamentations. Not to sit in the darkness the entire way, but to allow the Bible to empathize and for us to empathize with the Bible. To allow the Bible to speak to us and speak with us and just sit with us as if it's an old friend. Because that's what it means to be in relationship with the Bible, is to let it be an old friend to us at times. A close friend who is just willing to sit with us in this. And Lamentations is one of those places, especially when you read it, it's an old friend that speaks to you. It's an old friend that just sits next to you. And when you're crying out and you look at God and you have no clue what to say, and there are times that when you have no clue what to say, you're going to say the wrong thing. Lamentations is that friend that's going to sit next to you. And it says this in chapter 1. It says this: "How lonely sits the city that once was full of people. How like a widow she has become, she that was great among the nations, she that was a princess among the provinces, has become a vassal. She weeps bitterly in the night with tears on her cheek among all her lovers. She has no one to comfort her. All her friends have dealt treacherously with her. They have become her enemies. Judah has gone into exile with suffering and hard servitude. She lives now among the nations and finds no resting place. Her pursuers have all overtaken her in the midst of her distress. The roads to Zion mourn, for no one comes to the festivals. All her gates are desolate. Her priests groan, her young girls grieve, and her lot is bitter. Her foes have become the masters, her enemies prosper, because the Lord has made her suffer for the multitude of her transgressions. Her children have gone away captives before the foe. From daughter Zion has departed all her majesty. Her princes have become like stags that find no pasture. They fled without strength before the pursuer." There's a few things that we need to pull from this. It's number one, whenever you're reading Lamentations, whenever you're reading Psalms, of course, everybody knows that when you're reading Psalms, you're reading a poem, you're reading a song. Everybody knows that when you're reading, some people know that when you're reading Ecclesiastes, you're doing the same thing. Ecclesiastes is a poem, is a song. Many people know that when you read Song of Solomon, it's a song, it's a poem. And the funny thing about it is we, as a Christian church, sometimes we tend to criticize the love songs that we see on the radio, and some of the love songs that we see even in the contemporary music as well, like Christian music. But the crazy thing is, the Song of Solomon is actually a love song, and this is biblical, right? A lot of people actually don't know that Revelation is a poem. It's written with prose and poetry. It's especially so for Lamentations. Lamentations is a poem book. It is that book that you go into the aisle and you're seeing Psalms, Ecclesiastes, you're seeing Song of Solomon, you're walking into the aisle of poetry, basically, and Hebrew poetry especially. And Hebrew poetry is very, very theological in many of it too. And so this right here is definitely a reflection of the theology in their time. And a few of these things happen to explain the time that they lived in. And one of which, of course, is the fact that they've just lost their city, Jerusalem, right? They've just lost Israel has been devastated by losing the city, by the desolation and the desecration even of their city. And they're looking at this and they are in awe, but it's this shock and awe. It's this painful awe that settles into the stomach, and it is gross, it is disgusting, and it's the kind of awe that moves up into the throat, right? And it's really, that's the kind of awe that you feel, the tension that doesn't necessarily settle, the tension that doesn't let at night. That's the kind of awe that's happening here, and it starts off like that. How lonely is the city that once was full of people. Widow she has become. She that was great among the nations. She that was a princess among the provinces has become a vassal. We love this city, Long Beach. Imagine how much more they love their city, the city by which they believed God settled in. The reason why they settled into Jerusalem was because they believed that God had called them to settle in the city and build a temple that could rest there with him. Jerusalem was meant to be the kingdom on earth. And even now, Jerusalem is that city. Jerusalem is the city that people that they believe God has rested and settled and has called them to protect. In the same way, when we call someplace home, we truly believe that city is the city that God has called them to sit in, that God had called them to settle in. And every single one of us, when we begin to take ownership over a city or take ownership over any space that we rest and settle in, we become protectors of that city, and we truly believe that God has rested in that space. And when it is desolated and desecrated, there is a sense of shock and awe that rests in the body, that rests in the stomach. And it festers. Because, again, as Langston Hughes says it, it's a dream deferred. In the same way, we're feeling that about our worship, our worship space, our building, our Long Beach church. I mean, I sit here and I look around and I'm devastated by the fact that we still can't sit here. I walk around the city and I see the boards up, and as much as we try our best to beautify the city, and it is absolutely beautiful with the murals that go on top of these boards, of how much we have endured and are continuing to endure. There's a loneliness that is existing in the city. There's a symptom of being a vassal. There's a symbol of being a vassal that's happening to this city. And there's a weeping. There's a weeping for the businesses, the small business owners that are looking at their shop and torn through. And they have funded me hoping that will help to offset costs that they have to repair and recover. They are looking for comfort by anyone that can. And that's one of the reasons why today many from our sister churches around Southern California came just to pray for the city, because many have helped clean up the city, but many have actually heard the stories and have wept with those who have been affected by it most. In the same way, there are black mothers, black fathers, and black brothers and sisters who are fearing for their lives when they have red lights behind them. And when one is gunned down, there's something that happens. But many stories don't get to be told. Lamentations is not a hopeful book. It starts off with crying out and it ends with the crying out. Lamentations is not a place of rest. It starts off with unrest and it ends with unrest. Lament is truly what it is, a lament, a crying out. I'm finishing. I see you. That's Sean right now. We weep with our city. We weep Black community. We weep with our brothers and our families. We with those who are fearing for the COVID-19 pandemic. We weep our 5 and over and our ACT members who we got the call to open the church. We are not going to, because we would not be able to let to the space. We weep for the fact that if we were to come back to church, we'd have to have a lot of boundaries that go against exactly who we are. And that's a people of love and care that we want to just hug and hold each other. We weep for all of these things, and it's a lot to bear. Church, it is a lot to bear. Right now, this space is missing your warmth. Right now, my heart is missing your warmth. And I don't know when I will find rest just yet. And I honestly know that many of our members are feeling the same way. In reading Lamentations, it's important to examine the world around us, the world within us, and the world that we hope to bring light into, the world that we hope to bring to the future. And at the moment, if you have no words, know that it's okay to not have those words. Because there are times that happens, and it's okay. We have a whole book just for that. I love you, family. We will see each other soon. Know that we are working diligently to make sure that you are safe when you finally come. And know that we are working diligently to make sure that you do have a space to come back to, and that is that we are desperately praying that will be sometime soon. Would you pray with me? God, I thank you once again for your grace, your glory, and your love. May you lament with us as we are lamenting. May you mourn with us as we are mourning. And may we bring some bit of peace, God, into everything that we're feeling. And at some point, may you feel the lack of words that we have in our lives. We love you. In your name we pray. Amen.
Grander earth has quaked before. is well.